Hi you guys, it's Sharon and welcome back to Life with Sharon. I'm hoping that I can get all of this done in one video. You're probably not going to see much of me actually in the video, as I will be turning the screen around and you'll have my little board that I'm going to have. And that's because I've been doing a lot of typing and writing today, and I'm going to be reading what I wrote on my computer. So this is going to be in regards to a little series of how living with childhood psoriasis affected me back in the 80s and 90s, when it was a lot more rare and when there was no internet and it wasn't socially accepted. Okay, so give me 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. I had to readjust everything. So this is going to be part 2 of my silent torture story, living with childhood psoriasis in the 80s and 90s, like I explained. I'm going to briefly explain the 4 key points of what happened to me living with this condition as a child back then. And those are going to be, the stigma, the isolation, the emotional weight, and the long-term impact that it had on me. And so the stigma, psoriasis was not understood, and it was absolutely not normalized back then. Like, hands down, not at all in the most negative way. The isolation was very real for me. There was no internet, there was no online communities, no voices saying, me too or whatever, just because I lived in a world in a time where there wasn't internet. I mean, unless you were like rich, I guess, part of the elite, I'm not sure. But for me, it was not that way. The emotional weight, the shame, the bullying, the feeling different in a world that didn't allow for difference was extremely painful, and then the long-term impact, the trauma carried into my adult life, and it infected every part of my life. Growing up with psoriasis in the 80s and 90s, especially the 90s, was like walking around with a neon sign that said, "I'm different." Only there was no one around to translate what that really meant to me. So back then, skin diseases, they weren't talked about. They weren't on TV. They weren't trending hashtags or awareness campaigns, because there was no internet community at all. And nobody to say, hey, you're not alone, this is normal, etc., etc. Instead, there was either silence, laughs, or stares. And not fun stares, the creepy kind of stares that you get, that cause deeply scarred wounds and that carry a lot of shame. Every flare up felt like an attack, not just on my skin, but literally on my identity. I endured the yuck or fearful stares, the cruel comments, the questions that were whispered behind my back. Both kids and adults thought it was contagious. It cracked, it bled, it was itchy, it was awful. It was just a very horrifying experience to live through. Most of the adults didn't know what to say. I became a punchline, literally, for the world to ask, what's wrong with her? What's wrong with her? I was the outcast before I even understood what an outcast actually meant. And that's horrifying for a child and a teenager to go through. I mean, it's horrifying as an adult to go through that. The torture wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional. So, okay, imagine being a child and already wanting to crawl out of your own skin. Imagine watching everyone else move freely in their clothing. Their shorts, their tank tops, while you plotted ways to hide yourself, even in the heat of summer. Just imagine believing that you were so disgusting before you even know what self-worth was. That's what it was like for me. A daily war that nobody could see in an era where being different meant being invisible. Or worse, in my case, I was a target. So, okay, speaking of being a target, I want to specifically touch on school a little bit deeper, because it was a lot more painful for me. The truth is that it wasn't just skin, it was trauma. trauma that shaped how I saw myself, how I trusted or stopped trusting others, and how I carried my body into adulthood. Now, my brother didn't have the condition, only I did, which literally only made things worse for me because he was extremely popular and I clearly wasn't, but we were not close at all. We still aren't close at all. So I didn't even have his protection. And I didn't have my mom's protection either. School with psoriasis in the 80s and 90s was literally fucking hell for me. And I mean, it's my hell story. They say that the worst years are middle school and supposedly like freshman year in high school, right? So I say if you have a disease that is visible like that, you're going to be the target until you get out. That was my truth for me. Okay, so here's the hell school story. Kids didn't just stare, they mocked. They called me scaly, diseased, gross, a freak. Some refused to sit next to me like I carried the plague. Some would throw rocks at me in groups at recess. Cliques were formed against me. Even the misfits in society found fault in my condition and mocked and walked away. This only led to bitterness and hatred down the road that brewed inside of me. I remember the flakes on my desk, the way I tried to brush them off before anyone noticed, the incredible intense itching. I remember only wanting to wear light-colored clothing and having dyed my hair blonde in an attempt to hide the scales of ridicule called flakes. That itching was so intense I couldn't stop, and people thought I had lice. Over 3/4 of my scalp was affected by this, especially after puberty started, which of course is in junior high. I remember hating and always trying to get out of my gym classes. The horror of peeling off long sleeves while everyone else laughed in shorts and tank tops. I remember the sting of chlorine on my raw patches all over my body when the teachers forced me to go swimming in the pool or I would get graded an F. As if the torture from cruel peers wasn't enough. Even the teachers didn't protect me. Some looked completely disgusted. Some asked if I was contagious in front of everyone else. And others were so ignorant and only hurt when trying to help. There was no hiding. My body betrayed me daily, and when I cried, everyone laughed even harder. Psoriasis wasn't a skin disease. In school, it was a public execution. Every day, piece by piece, my childhood dignity was destroyed. Due to my natural personality of wanting to be a social butterfly, I eventually settled for any form of unhealthy attention I got, just to be accepted and part of something at any and all costs. In part 3, I will discuss how this affected my relationships in my teen years up through into my mid to late 20s. But anybody who's out there, who's listening, who actually listened to all of this video, if you experienced that, please share your story with me. I know I am not alone, and I know you don't need to be alone either. Together, I truly believe we can make a difference in other people's lives. People who've been bullied relentlessly, like myself. It doesn't have to stay that way. We can do something together because there is the internet now. There is social media now. There's ways to speak up and speak out. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you again. This is Sharon with Life with Sharon.